am standing in for Caroline Reynolds, who was supposed to be our I was actually looking forward to spending a lovely day up at Lake Tahoe, but I would much rather be here with you. No, absolutely. I truly enjoy being here. It's always just the love of my life, and I am so glad to be here. And I'm also very sad about Caroline. Caroline is experiencing some health challenges, so keep her in your treatments as well, and just know the truth for her as she finds her way back to a place of health and well-being. So this morning I kind of picked a topic out of the air and decided that ego was a great thing to talk about, because I know that we all have our little struggles with that concept that we call ego. And I want to share with you a little story that I think I've shared with you before, but it had so much meaning with what I'm going to be talking about today. And it was the story about a wise old man that was revered by his community, and everyone worshipped him and really went to him for advice, and he always had exactly the right thing to say, the right words to share. And every time they went to visit him, they saw in his room that he had a book. It was a book with a golden cover, and everyone wanted to know what was in this book, because they thought this must be the source of all of his wisdom. So when he died, people rushed into his room to find out what was inside the book. And when they opened the book, it was completely blank, except for one page. And on that one page it said, "When you realize the difference between the container and the contents, you will know life." So perfect, because I think the whole issue around the ego is all about mistaken identity. It's all about mistaking the contents for the container. To think that we are what we are on the outside, or what we project, or what we show in the world, when indeed there's something much deeper, much stronger, much more powerful within us. So I did a lot of research this week. I had a wonderful time looking through lots and lots of articles and things that I had read before, and some were new, around the ego. And if I were to share with you all of that information, we'd be here until next Thursday. So I've kind of encapsulated it into three ideas, into kind of a process. And the first process, or the first part of that process, comes from the overall idea that actually is pretty Eastern in terms of its origins with regard to ego, which is that state of no thing, that place where we are not our bodies at all, but we are in this place of absolute divine bliss. And there's a man named Robert Dobie that wrote an article for Parabola magazine in 2002. And that article gave me some really clear ideas in terms of what is meant by this, because we struggle with this concept of no thing, or going to a place of bliss where we are no longer aware of our physical being, and we're simply in this place of total awareness of everything, but not our thing, not who we are. And so when I look at that, I realize that that's something that perhaps can become our spiritual vision. Because you know what a vision is? A vision is the vision for our organization is actually awakening humanity to its spiritual magnificence. So when you look at that vision, it's like, will this happen in our lifetime? Possibly, but probably not. But it's a vision, and the vision keeps us on track. It keeps us moving towards that idea, knowing that everything we choose and every action we take and every intention we set moves us toward that vision of awakening humanity. So why not have the spiritual vision of this idea of complete oneness, of complete bliss, of this idea of no thing, of being in a place of absolute ideal beingness. So what it really means is to have the purity of consciousness without any attachment in the world. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that idea, the purity of consciousness with no attachment to anything in the world? How many attachments do you think you have right now? A few? One or two? we are just laden with attachments, aren't we? And yet, that process of becoming so pure of consciousness without attachment to these things in the world, that's the ideal. That's the vision. He says this, and this is kind of the definition of that ideal. He says, we cannot know God, the absolute, by setting ourselves apart from God in rational thought, but only by participating with our entire being in the purity of God's existence. Such a great, great quote. It gives you that feeling of knowing that to just set everything in our world, everything that we have attachments to, aside, and then just be in the purity of God consciousness. What that means, however, is something that is paradoxically impossible for us to do, and that would be to stop thinking. Now, how do we do that? It's that place of realizing that in order for us to be so much in that sense of purity of consciousness that we have to not just calm the thinking process, but stop it altogether. Because the thinking cannot bring us to purity of consciousness. Only being can bring us there. So think about that as we move on with this today. This is our challenge, to recognize that rational thinking is something that the mind does, and that it's a wonderful thing. Because without rational thinking, without our physical world of being able to think about things in the world, we wouldn't understand anything. We wouldn't make connections or communication. We wouldn't appreciate anything in the world without that thought process. So it's a wonderful thing. Yet, in order to go to this place of spiritual ideal, we somehow have to let go of that. And therein, of course, lies the challenge. How can we experience the purity of God and still be thinking beings? So when we consider this idea, it's a radical idea. It's radical to think about detaching ourselves from things in the world, because it uproots us from everything that's familiar. Everything in our world that is familiar would go away. Can you imagine waking up one morning and looking in the mirror and not even recognizing who that is? Or looking in your closet and looking at all the clothes and thinking, what are these? or looking at food and thinking, what should I do with this? Or not even thinking that, but just being in it. Just being there with it. To not be able to experience those kinds of choices. So my interpretation of all of this is that we've got to create a dance. We have to create a dance that kind of allows us to be in that place and know what that purity is about, know that the vision is there, but at the same time recognize that there is a place for our rational thinking. There's a place for that because it takes us to the idea of being in the purity of God. So it means that when we enter that state of no being, we enter into a state of bliss, and it's very, very scary. I had an experience once, and maybe some of you have had this similar experience, because I know many of you are very serious meditators, and I know that at least have been, we fall off the wagon from time to time, I know. But the experience of meditation, when you really are very disciplined and very clear about it, which I was for a number of years. I was a very, very, very serious meditator. And I got to a point one day, I shared this with my class on Monday night, where I was in such a state of bliss that I felt as though I was about to completely leave my body, planet, everything. And it scared me so much, I had to snap myself out of it. Because that thought of losing who I am was just too scary for my consciousness at that moment. So I'm sure many of you have had that experience, and it is a very, very, very scary thing. So maybe this idea of totally, leaving is a little radical right now, but there's nothing that stops us from keeping this as our vision. And that's my point today. It doesn't mean that we can't experience the glimpses of bliss or the idea of this idea of experiencing oneness or the connection of the presence with our very being. And I mean, those things are absolutely possible. And it gives us an ideal. It gives us something to move towards. So we can take steps towards this experience of being one with the one. So what we're going to do is establish a pathway. Give ourselves the way to move towards this vision. And in order to do that, we've got to ask ourselves lots of questions along the way. And the first one might be, where am I now? Where am I on this path right now? How far along am I in terms of my own spiritual discipline or my movement towards this idea of the spiritual ideal? Where am I? And maybe I don't care. Maybe I'm happy being my ego-centered self right now. And for some, that's okay, because that's a choice we're making in the moment. So we have to know that this is an individual choice. It's something that we are choosing right now to say, if I'm moving towards this spiritual idea, this vision of complete purity of God consciousness, where am I now? And how well do we know ourselves? Go back to the container and the contents. How much am I identifying with the container versus the contents? How am I experiencing my life in regard to that idea? So as we look at the concept of ego, where is our awareness? Where's our awareness right now? And of course, the one word that we all recognize is egocentric. We know lots of people that we can say, oh, they are egocentric. We have no trouble pinpointing someone else. It's really, oh yeah, they've got a big ego. So, we know that. We know what that word means. And there's another word, or not actually a series of words, it's the opposite of that. It's the awakened I consciousness. It's the awakened. It's the contents coming to the surface and revealing themselves. So there's this difference between being egocentric and being the I awakened consciousness. And there's a huge gradation from that place of being so egocentric to that place of being awakened in the I consciousness, and everything in between. And I think we swing back and forth, all of us from time to time. We go from that ego place to the awakened place, and then most of us rest somewhere in the middle of that. We're doing that dance, where we're, kind of get caught off guard, where we're, oh yeah, I'm absolutely in my ego now. And this other place where we're, really so open and so connected, and we're just in a really wonderful place. The difference, and this came from another article in the same magazine, where this woman is talking about individualism versus individuality. So we can look at it and say, are we in individualism, which is we are on this ego place where we are wanting everything and all things to be pointing at me. That I'm literally sucking the life out of the world, sucking the life out of everybody that I see, because it's all about me. And then, then we go to that other side. And of course, everything in between, to the other place where we are coming from the place of what's in the contents of in the container, and we are connecting with all of the things that the power, the energy that give us the ability to create, to give, to express, to be of service to the world, and of course everything in between, depending on where we are. So here's the difference. We're either taking or hoarding, or giving and expressing. In other words, we're circulating divine energy in this place, and here we're not. Now, which side do you think is going to move towards that vision more quickly or more easily? So again, you see, we're making choices in the moment that take us and keep us on that path of being in that place where we're moving towards the spiritual vision. We can choose to be in that place of giving and expressing rather than keeping and hoarding and sucking the life out of everyone we know. We know people like that. Anyway, there's a beautiful quote by Steiner where he says, "The rose adorns herself in order to adorn the garden." The rose adorns herself in order to adorn the garden. That's our job, to adorn the garden. Not to be the beautiful rose that simply attracts all the attention and wants everyone to look at it, but to simply adorn the garden, to give its life, to give its beauty to all those who are around it so it can experience that. So are we expecting the world to be impressed by us, or are we seeking to give back to the world? And again, there's a huge continuum of all of that. And my point again, we have a choice in every moment to set an intention, to become aware, to really look at ourselves and ask ourselves, where am I now on this continuum? Am I way down here, or am I here? Am I choosing to move into this place where I'm truly ready to serve, ready to give, ready to express, taking that incredible divine energy and letting it flow through me so that I can give something wonderful back to the world? The pathway is about being spontaneous and conscious, not about self-aggrandizing. And it may be that our spiritual path is not to arrive at a place of purity, but it's to be in a place of purity at every given moment. To know that we can choose in that moment to harmonize with life, to simply be in a place of harmony with life. And I think one of the things, there are always, life has these little tricks that it throws at us. Always has these little flip sides that it throws at us, because there's so many times when we feel as though we are truly in this place of giving and serving, and yet there's a hidden motive that somehow, because we're giving and serving, we want attention back on ourselves. So we've got to be careful to know that when we truly are giving, we are giving. We're not looking for anything as a result of that. We're not looking to get any kind of feedback or attention or prizes or any of that kind of stuff. What we're knowing is that we are simply being the energy of life, simply allowing that beautiful essence to flow through us. And again, we may be somewhere in the middle from time to time, but we have a choice. We can move into that place of beingness. So the third part of this, the vision, the pathway, the practice. The practice is what we can do day to day, moment to moment. And the practice has to do with maintaining balance along the path. You know that story about the person who's riding their bicycle along the bank ditch, and they're doing just fine, but as soon as they turn to the side, the bicycle falls off into the ditch. We've got to know that that's what happens to us. Our focus has to be on our vision. Our focus has to be always on what we're moving towards, of knowing that we're keeping that as our criteria for making the next step, for taking the next thing and putting it into action, regardless of what it's about, whether it's about our work, our play, our partnership, or whatever. We've got to continue to make those decisions in line with the vision. The vision is, what am I doing to stay in the purity of God consciousness? What am I doing that keeps me aligned with that? What am I doing to keep myself expressing and giving back to the world rather than somehow looking for a way to be aggrandized? So one person that we can look to is Ralph Waldo Emerson, because he was one that continued to remind us that every time we looked at something else in terms of being other than ourselves, we would find ourselves feeling separate. Because if we're really using our vision to keep us in the purity of the one consciousness, then what we have to remember is that when we're at one, there's no judgment, there's no separation, there's no me and you, there is only the one. And I see the purity, the wholeness, the presence of God in you as I see it in me. It is all one thing. And the practice has to do with this. Someone asked Emerson once, how do I overcome my ego and all the attractions of the world to find my true self? And this is what he answered. The relations of the soul to the divine spirit are so pure that it is profane to seek and to interpose helps. Whenever the mind is simple and receives divine wisdom, old things pass away, means, teachers, texts, temples fall. It lives now and absorbs past and future into the present hour. And here's the kicker. All things are made sacred by relation to it, one as much as another. All things are made sacred. So we have to remember that the practice is about seeing all things as the sacred expression of life. To see every event with neutrality. The moment that we begin to experience a sense of judgment or separation or jealousy or anger, what happens? It sends us off into this ego place. Because what the ego is doing is it's protecting. It's protecting the image of itself. It's protecting the container. When indeed, when we see things from the neutrality, from that place of oneness, from the divine relationship of all life, it allows us to see ourselves as a part of that and realize that we are connected, we're interconnected. There's nothing to defend. There's nothing to protect. There is simply only the process of giving back into the world because that beautiful energy is giving so much to us. That why can't we give it back to the world? So for me, it's the realization that my thinking mind cannot let go of the ties of my ego. It has nothing to do with my thinking. It's about my being. It's about my being with the harmony of all life. It's about planting myself, as Emerson also says, in the middle of the stream of power. Put yourself in the middle of that flow. And know that you are a part and parcel of that divine flow of energy. Because it provides the means for us to transform who we are in the world. The ego can be the root of our suffering, and we do suffer when we're over here. protecting and defending and dealing with all of that, or it can be the source of our greatest joy. Because when we are in this place of openness and freedom and total service to humanity, to the world, giving through that beautiful divine circulation, it is the most joyous thing that we can ever imagine. So it can be our greatest strength or our greatest weakness. So I return to a quote by Robert Dobie as a closing for today. He says, "No longer grasping after things with our ego, we let them be, and thus release them for the first time in their truth, which is to say, we let all things be in God, and let God be in us and in all things." That's the absolute solution to all of it. To let it be. Remember the vision, to be in the purity of the consciousness of the One. Pathway, to truly know and understand that we have a choice, and to know where we are on that pathway, to keep ourselves focused and make every decision, make every choice in line with that vision. And then the practice, to be in harmony with all life, to be in that divine flow, and to simply flow with what is, to not judge, to simply look at it and say, it is what it is. My favorite statement. It is what it is. And you are what you are, perfect, whole, and complete right now. And so it is.